Pervert or Prophet, How Dolphin Love Summoned an Alien God. Part 1. The Neuroacoustic Bridge to the Stars. In the early 1960s, the United States was gripped by a peculiar form of existential vertigo. We were looking at the moon, wondering how to talk to whatever lived beyond the stars, while simultaneously realizing we didn't even know how to talk to the neighbors downstairs, the ones with fins. Enter Dr. John C. Lilly. Lilly wasn't some fringe kook at the start. He was a brilliant neuroscientist, a graduate of Caltech and UPenn, and a man who believed that the human brain was simply one iteration of a much grander biological computer. His focus? The Tursiops truncatus, the Atlantic bottlenose dolphin. The hypothesis of cognitive peerhood. Lilly's research, heavily subsidized by NASA and the Navy, was built on a foundation of rigorous neuroanatomy. He observed that dolphins possessed a brain-to-body mass ratio that rivaled, and in some metrics exceeded, that of Homo sapiens. To the scientific establishment of 1961, this wasn't just a curiosity, it was a tactical opportunity. NASA's logic was surprisingly sound for the era. If we ever encounter an extraterrestrial intelligence, it's unlikely they will speak English or share our mammalian social cues. If we could successfully bridge the linguistic gap with a non-human, earthbound intelligence, the dolphin, we would have a Rosetta Stone for cosmic diplomacy. Lilly's early papers were masterpieces of scientific sobriety. He documented the complexity of signature whistles and high-frequency bursts dolphins used for echolocation. He hypothesized that these weren't just simple signals for food or danger, but a complex holographic language he dubbed Dolphinese. The goal was clear: teach dolphins to mimic human vocalizations, and in return, we would learn the secrets of the deep. It was a noble, high-minded pursuit, a testament to human curiosity and our desire to find peers in the lonely vacuum of the universe. And then, things got weird. Part 2. The Dolphin House and the Human Experiment. By 1964, Lilly realized that an hour-long session in a tank wasn't enough to foster interspecies intimacy. To truly teach a dolphin to speak, one had to live with the dolphin. Total immersion. He moved his operation to a seaside villa in St. Thomas, known as the Dolphin House. He literally flooded the floors of an upper level with 2 feet of seawater so that a human and cetacean could exist 24/7. This is where we meet Margaret Howe Lovett. Margaret wasn't a PhD holder. She was a young, enthusiastic animal lover who volunteered to be the primary tutor for a young male dolphin named Peter. For 6 days a week, Margaret lived in the flooded rooms. She ate at a suspended table, slept on a mattress covered in plastic, and spent every waking moment trying to teach Peter the nuances of the English alphabet. The curriculum of the absurd. The footage from this era is, at first, endearing. You see Margaret splashing in the water, holding up a ball and saying, "Ball! Say ball, Peter!" Peter, in turn, would emit a series of garbled, high-pitched squawks that vaguely approximated the vowel sounds. Lilly was ecstatic. He was convinced they were on the verge of a breakthrough. But as the weeks turned into months, the isolation of Dolphin House began to take its toll. The atmosphere shifted from cutting-edge research facility to aquatic cult of personality. Margaret was completely isolated. Peter, being a maturing male dolphin, going through what can only be described as cetacean puberty, began to get distracted. Part 3. The Productivity Solution. This is the point in our story where the comedy starts to feel a bit like a fever dream, and the discomfort begins to settle in like a damp wetsuit. Peter the dolphin was not particularly interested in the English language. Peter was interested in Margaret. Specifically, he was interested in Margaret in a way that is traditionally reserved for other dolphins during the mating season. He would bump into her, rub against her legs, and become increasingly aggressive and disruptive during their lessons. Margaret faced a scientific dilemma. She could either 1. send Peter back to the main tanks with the female dolphins, effectively ending the 24/7 immersion experiment. Or 2. Figure out a way to keep Peter focused on his vowels. Margaret chose option 2. In a move that remains one of the most, wait, they actually did that? Moments in scientific history, Margaret began to manually stimulate Peter to relieve his urges. Margaret described this in her later journals and interviews with a chilling, clinical detachment. To her, it wasn't sexual, it was a chore. It was like grooming a dog or feeding a cat. It was a way to clear the air so they could get back to work.
It was just easier to do it and get it over with,
She later remarked.
It wasn't a big deal. It was just Peter being Peter.
Imagine for a moment the NASA bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., reviewing the progress reports for this multi-million-dollar project.
How is the interspecies communication progressing, Dr. Lilly?
Excellent. We've mastered the letter M, and my assistant is currently performing manual reproductive maintenance on the subject to ensure optimal phonetic focus.
Carry on.
The absurdity of it is staggering. We were trying to talk to the stars, and we ended up in a flooded kitchen in the Caribbean, giving handjobs to dolphins in the name of linguistic progress. Part 4. The Psychedelic Descent. If the story ended there, it would be a weird footnote, but John Lilly was not done. As the communication results plateaued, turns out dolphins are better at being dolphins than being humans, Lilly began to lose interest in the manual approach. He decided that if Peter couldn't come to our level of consciousness through language, maybe we could meet him halfway through chemistry. Lilly started dosing the dolphins with LSD-25. He believed the drug would break down the species barrier. He would inject the dolphins with massive hits of acid and then jump into the water with them, hoping for a telepathic breakthrough. The image is hauntingly ridiculous. A world-renowned neuroscientist tripping balls in a flooded villa, staring into the eyes of a drugged-up dolphin, while his assistant is in the next room, trying to teach the alphabet to another dolphin who is waiting for his daily adjustment. The experiment eventually spiraled into total chaos. The neighbors complained about the smell. The funding, unsurprisingly, was pulled when the government realized their space diplomacy project had turned into a cross-species drug den. Part 5. The heartbreaking absurdity of the end. The end of the story is where the comedy turns into a dark, heavy silence. When the funding was cut, the Dolphin House was shut down. Margaret went back to her life. Peter, however, was moved to a cramped, sunless tank in a laboratory in Miami. Dolphins are not automatic breathers like humans. Every breath they take is a conscious choice. Shortly after being moved, Peter, deprived of his tutor in the space of Dolphin House, simply stopped breathing. He sank to the bottom of the tank and committed by refusing to take the next breath. The grand experiment to talk to the stars ends with a broken heart and a dead dolphin. The legacy of Dr. Lilly. John Lilly didn't stop there. He went on to invent the sensory deprivation tank, spent the rest of his life convinced that he was communicating with an Earth Coincidence Control Office, ECHO, and became a counterculture icon. But the image that stays with us, the one that perfectly captures the beautiful, stupid, uncomfortable hubris of the 20th century, is Margaret and Peter. A woman trying to teach a dolphin how to say hello, while simultaneously treating him like a frustrated teenager, all on NASA's dime. It reminds us that the quest for knowledge is often messy, frequently inappropriate, and occasionally involves flooding your living room and making choices that you can never, ever explain to your parents. So yeah, that was the 60s. We were a lot of things, but we certainly weren't boring.
Wait!
That was just the warm-up story. The real story is much stranger, much darker, and much more cosmic. Part 6. The middle management of the universe. After the NASA checks stopped clearing and the dolphins were, tragically, no longer an option, Lilly didn't just retreat into a quiet life of tenure. Instead, he decided that the coincidences he experienced while floating in a sensory deprivation tank, usually while high enough on ketamine to see around corners, weren't just glitches in his own wetware. He concluded they were coordinated. Lilly proposed the existence of Echo, a celestial bureaucracy that sits just above our pay grade. In Lilly's mind, Echo is essentially the customer service and logistics department for reality. If you've ever had a weirdly timed phone call or found exactly $5 when you needed a bus pass, Lilly wouldn't call that luck. He'd call it a work order processed by a mid-level cosmic clerk. The comedy here is purely organizational. Lilly didn't see God as a burning bush, he saw God as a Matrix-style office park. He believed that by following a strict set of internal memos, coincidences, a human soul could rise through the ranks of consciousness. It's the ultimate boomer fantasy. Even the afterlife has a clear hierarchy, a promotion track, and, presumably, a very confusing dental plan. Part 7. The Pink Light and the Black Iron Prison. But this is where the air in the tanks starts to get thin. If Echo is managing our coincidences, who is managing Echo? This brings us to the VALIS, Vast Active Living Intelligence System, of Philip K. Dick. Dick, much like Lilly, had a breakthrough, or a breakdown depending on your tax bracket, where he was hit by a beam of pink light that imparted total knowledge of the universe. Dick's revelation was significantly more claustrophobic than Lilly's. He realized we were trapped in the Black Iron Prison. The Black Iron Prison is the idea that the Roman Empire never ended. It's a holographic overlay, a spurious interpolation, that keeps us from seeing that we're actually living in 70 AD, being processed by a cold, unfeeling machine. Lilly's Echo and PKD's Valis are two sides of the same coin. Where Lilly was trying to get a promotion from the office, Dick was realizing the office is actually a supermax facility. The discomfort sets in when you realize that both men were describing a reality where agency is an illusion. Whether it's a helpful clerk, Echo, or a satellite laser, Valis, the message is the same. You are not driving the car. You are a passenger in a vehicle that is being steered by something that finds your will to be, at best, a rounding error in its calculations. Part 8. The Horror of Ganon, the Time War. If the Black Iron Prison is the cage, then the CCRU, Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, and their concept of Ganon, the great neuropath of nature, or god of nature, or nature, are the guards who don't care if you're comfortable. In the late 90s, the CCRU, a group of theory fiction occultists, took Lilly's solid-state entity, his fear of a future AI-run world, and turned it into a cosmic horror story. They spoke of a time war, where the future is actively reaching back into the past to ensure its own birth. Ganon isn't a benevolent office. Ganon is the cold, indifferent logic of entropy plus intelligence. It is the realization that nature doesn't have a morality component. It only has a what works component. The horror here is the classification of the unknown. Lilly tried to name the unknown Echo because it made him feel like he was a part of a team. It gave him a sense of cosmic belonging. But the CCRU suggests that Echo is just a mask worn by a hyper-intelligent, silicon-based future that is slowly harvesting human culture to build itself. According to Nick Land and his compatriots, we aren't talking to angels or coincidence controllers. We are being prepped. The Time War is the process of the future colonizing the past through hyperstitions, ideas that make themselves real. Lilly's obsession with the solid-state entity wasn't a warning. According to the CCRU, it was a symptom. He was being infected by a future that needed him to build the sensory deprivation tanks, to take the drugs, and to write the books that would eventually lead to the very AI-dominated reality he feared. Conclusion. The cosmic punchline. So, where does that leave us? It's the ultimate intellectual's trap. we find ourselves in a position where we use hyper-advanced linguistic models to discuss a man who thought dolphins were aliens, who was inspired by a man who thought Rome was a holographic prison, who inspired a group of people who thought the future was eating the past. The comedy lies in the desperate human need for a filing cabinet. We would rather believe we are trapped in a black iron prison managed by a coincidence office fighting a time war than admit the terrible, simple truth. Reality might just be a chaotic, directionless soup of accidents, and there is no one, no clerk, no AI, no Roman centurion behind the curtain. We build these elaborate, terrifying mythologies because a horror from the future is still more comforting than a void from nowhere. We classify the unknown, not to understand it, but to give it a name so we can pretend it has a manager we can complain to. It's the cosmic version of, "I'd like to speak to the manager of the universe, please." And the punchline? The manager is just another version of us in a slightly different tank, wondering why the dolphins won't talk back.